Welcome to the Rigatoni Capital podcast. I'm your host, Colin. I'm here with a special guest that comes on about once a month, Kevin Bagholder on Substack. How you doing?
I am outstanding, sir. Glad to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing very good. I just think that you bring so much value to my subscribers. I'm sure you bring value to your subscribers on Substack. You definitely do a lot of investigative research on investing in particular stocks. Like gold, you have a background in gold, so I definitely want to kind of get your feel on the physical hard assets in that market. And we can talk about silver, of course, and we can talk a little bit about Bitcoin. I know you did a little bit of research on the the hyperscaler CapEx topic, so we can discuss that.
Yes.
And we can discuss pretty much whatever you want to talk about. This is your floor to talk about whatever you want.
Well, I do appreciate the kind words, sir. Um, I'll tell you what triggered the research on the hyperscalers and the CapEx. I had a buddy of mine that I've known for 40 years, came at me the other day and said that he took a position in NVDA. And I've always known him as a very conservative investor. And I said, what brought this on? And he said, well, the revenue growth, the earnings growth, they've got the hottest product out there. When you combine all of that, in his mind, it's worth paying 40x earnings. And I thought, okay, that's fine. And I can't bring myself to do it, but I got to thinking about it. And basically what I thought was if you had to pick one company that's the face for CapEx spending, the company that's benefiting the most from CapEx spending, it would be hard to argue it's anybody other than NVIDIA. And Microsoft is shipping them money, Meta's shipping them money, Google, you pick the company, NVIDIA is getting dollars from them, right? And being an old guy, I remember back in the 90s what it was like. And so I went back and looked up some of the numbers from the late 90s. And you look at some of the biggest CapEx spenders in the late 90s and who were the beneficiaries, right? And it would be hard to argue anybody other than Intel and Cisco were probably the biggest beneficiaries of CapEx spending back in the late 90s.
I would
Um,
agree. Yeah.
right. And you look at who was doing a lot of that spending, and I picked at random Dell. They were the biggest computer maker on the planet. They were selling more computers than anybody else. They needed Intel chips to go inside. They needed routers from Cisco to make them communicate with one another. Um, so they were spending CapEx like crazy, right? So I decided to try and see if there's any correlation or any patterns with today. And I went and looked at the CapEx numbers of Dell from 96 to 99. And basically, what they spent in CapEx went up 4x over that period. And I went and looked at the revenues of Cisco during that same period. And guess what? They were up about 4.5x, 4 billion to 18 billion. Very much in line with what Dell was spending. Now, I'm not saying that they got their money strictly from Dell, but Dell is kind of a good proxy because they were the
Sure.
biggest. Just like today, Microsoft and Google and Meta, they're a good proxy for how NVIDIA's revenues are growing. So then I compared it to today and looked at it. And in the last 4+ years, um, Microsoft's gone from 20 billion in capex to 120, about 6x, right? Google and Meta, not quite 6x, but very much in line, 22 billion to 90 some billion, 18 billion to 70 some billion, something like that. They're all in the 4 to 6x range. We go and look at Nvidia's revenues in the last 4 years, and what have they done? They've 7x'd. They're about on par with what the hyperscalers are spending, right? So I thought, okay, Then I went back again, back to 99 and 2000, and I went into Grok, my favorite of the AIs. I tried Claude, by the way. I struggle with it. But
Really?
anyway, I went into Grok and I had to pull up the numbers for 2000 and try and figure out when the CapEx peaked for Dell. And sure enough, it peaked in early 2000.
Okay.
In spring of 2000, they came out and guided and said, you know what, we're not going to be spending this kind of money anymore. And going forward, we're going to be spending considerably less. If you look at 2001, their CapEx halved, right? And then it was down another 20, 25% in 2002. So they pulled back considerably to what they were spending. What did the Cisco and Intel stock price do during that period? Once they announced, they both went 75% off. Cisco almost 80% off
Yeah.
in a little over a year. So my thought is that if we look at today and with what Microsoft, Google, and Meta are spending, if and when they come out and say, hey, you know what? We're going to be cutting back on what we're spending. We're not going to be spending as much. What do you suppose happens to the primary beneficiary of all that spending, which is NVIDIA? They're going to have a 50, 60, 70% off sale. Now,
Sure.
that doesn't mean NVIDIA can't go to 300 first or 400 first. It could. The numbers they're putting up are unbelievable. And it got, like I said, it got my rather conservative friend to go out and take a position in NVIDIA. So I'm trying to figure out, and I went and looked at that, and I'm thinking, how sustainable even is the spending that these companies are doing, right? So I don't have Microsoft in front of me. I'm not sure what I do. I do have Google in front of me. Let's use Google. So if you look at 2025, okay, Google had 400 billion in revenues. You take out their cost of goods and their SG&A, 270 billion. Their basic profit as a company was 130 billion dollars.
Mm-hmm.
They paid 27 billion in taxes. That leaves them 103 billion. They also pay a small dividend, and they have interest on their debt that they have to pay because they do carry some debt on their books. That leaves them 91 billion. What are they spending in CapEx this year? 91 billion. They're actually guiding higher. So every dollar they make is going to pay CapEx. Every dollar, right? They also have some other expenses on poor investments that they made where they had to spend about 35 billion of that 91 on other things. So in order to pay the 91, they actually went out and added almost 40 billion dollars in debt to their balance sheet. They went from a company that had 15 billion in debt to a company that's got 50 or a little bit more, right? So they're at this level, what they're spending now just to maintain this, they're having to borrow $40 billion just to be able to keep this up. So is there a world in which they could again 4x what they're spending over the next 4 years? No. Is there a world where they can even maintain? Well, just to maintain, they're having to add 40 plus billion dollars in debt a year, right? So that doesn't even seem plausible. Now, Microsoft and Meta, like I said, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they're no different. If you go look at Meta, they've added $50 billion in debt in the last couple of years. In fact, I think most of it in the last year. Again, just to pay what they're spending. If they continue to borrow money, well, then maybe they could continue to stay at these levels of spending. But all they're doing is weakening their balance sheet. Now, I'm not saying that what those companies are doing is wrong. I'm sure that they have a plan that justifies the spending. And they've got people with a lot more knowledge than me that are saying, yeah, cut the checks, get it done, spend the money, because there's revenues downstream from this, right? I'm just looking at it from the outside based on their financials and saying, in what world can they continue to spend like this? Okay. If they can't continue to spend like this, then away goes the growth for NVIDIA. Let's just say they maintain. How does NVIDIA grow their revenues from here? If the lion's share of it is coming from companies like this that are not going to increase anymore, what's the avenue for them to continue to grow revenues? I don't know if there is one. I really don't. And that's my big question. And that was the question to my friend. I said, look, man, you're paying 40 times earnings for this. What justifies that? Well, what justifies it is the growth rate in revenues and earnings. But it's not so much the growth rate, you have to be able to maintain that. And I'm struggling to see a world in which they can even maintain. How does Microsoft and Meta and Google and all the rest of them continue to spend in the way that they've been spending without going further and further into debt, which makes it harder and harder? So I know you're bullish on the company. I know
Sure.
that you like it. And that's part of the reason. I mean, help me understand it, because when I pitched this to my friend and I told him all this like I'm telling you, and his response was, and I couldn't even believe it. His response was, you know what, this time is different. They have the money. If they got to keep borrowing to do it, they'll do it. And I I, I just
Well,
struggle to see it. Do you have a response to any of this?
well, their forward multiple is in the low 20s. So are you looking at a trailing
Yeah,
PE of
trailing
40?
12 months, I think their PE is 40. Am I right about that? Or
You're probably
39?
right. Yeah. I only look at a forward multiple because the company's growing so fast. That's just how I look at NVIDIA. Um,
The problem with forward multiples is
hmm.
you're assuming the growth rate continues,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
right?
Sure.
So
Yeah. I
looking in
wouldn't
the
look.
rearview mirror, you can say this is what it is now, and hopefully it'll continue to grow at 40%. And if it does that,
Yeah.
then this is the multiple, right?
Yeah, and I would probably take it easy on looking at a forward 2028, even 2027, 2028, 2029. I think that's too far out to look, but I'm pretty confident that of their estimates for the year of 2026. So I look at their forward multiple that way, just 2026 numbers, and I see it's not trading too crazy. What I'm concerned about is I own all these hyperscaler companies. In fact, I own Meta, Amazon, and I own Oracle. I
Oh,
own
wow.
Oracle. Now, I don't own Microsoft anymore. I sold out of that position, but I'm heavily invested in the NASDAQ 100. So I have plenty of exposure to Microsoft and both Alphabet. And then also remember OpenAI, Claude,
Sure, sure.
also Elon Musk's Grok. All these companies also go into the ecosystem. Yeah, I think there's some cyclical nature to NVIDIA's industry, and I think that I want these hyperscalers to taper off eventually in the 2030 timeframe. I think it would be a mistake to continue past 2029 at least to continue to increase their CapEx on the AI infrastructure build out phase.
Mhm.
But I still think that NVIDIA is going to, I think NVIDIA will pull back once that's a reality. But I still think NVIDIA is kind of built this kind of ecosystem where a lot of these companies need to at least train on like their software, which is CUDA. And, I think that they have just, I think within the last 12 months, when Broadcom partnered with Alphabet to make these custom silicon TPUs,
Yes.
and that's more on the training side of things. And now it can do I mean, sorry, that's more on the inference side of things. But now we're finding out that it can do training too. So that eats away at NVIDIA's market share. I think NVIDIA has decided to pivot. That's when they partnered with Grok with a Q, and they are getting into the training side of things. I think they're getting into memory now. I think they're just expanding their wings, and in my opinion, the company is becoming almost too big to fail, meaning that they are becoming so large. NVIDIA has got their hands now in everything when it comes to software, and I just like what Jensen Huang at least is trying to do, because there's going to be a time, I'm going to say it's going to be the year 2029, 2030, when these large hyperscalers do have to eventually get back to more profitability, so we can they can buy back shares. I mean, they're not going to be buying back shares for the next 3 years. So, yeah, no, but look, I hear you. I wouldn't have bought NVIDIA. Like, when did your friend buy NVIDIA?
This is about a week ago we had this conversation, which is what inspired the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think he had bought it maybe the week before. I don't
yeah.
so
See, I
maybe two
bought it.
weeks ago he bought something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I bought it in 2016 and I trimmed profits last year. So no, 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 no. I trimmed profits in the year 2024. So I had to pay a nice tax bill in the year 2025 and yeah, it's still my largest holding. I mean, what am I going to do? I'm
So
kind of
so
like whatever.
one of the big takeaways from the research that I was trying to do was to get an idea as to when the pullback would be coming in the beneficiaries of the CapEx, right? And Dell's CapEx actually peaked in 2000. Okay, that was the top year. In 2001, like I said, they cut it in half. In 2002, they trimmed it by another 25%, right? So the peak was in 2000. They announced in the spring of 2000 that they were going to be cutting back on the CapEx. And that point right there, when they came out with the announcements, not when they actually cut back, not when it became a reality, but when they said, we are cutting back, that's when the Intels and the Ciscos and the rest of them really started tanking. So my thought is on current day, it's not going to be when they actually quit spending. There'll be a lag, right?
Mhm.
It's when they come out and say, we're going to trim going forward. That's the point at which I think people are going to go, you know what? The beneficiary of that's going to get punished. And that's when I think NVIDIA pulls back. So not so much when it becomes a reality and the cutting is cut back. I think it's when these companies announce.
Of course, of course. It's going to be built into the stock immediately once we find out and once we get more clarification on when they're going to taper. In a
Right.
perfect world, they're calling it tapering, but that's not how,
Right.
that's not how
The
it
question is,
works.
when is that coming? It could be this quarter, it could be next quarter, it could be next year. I don't know,
Yeah,
but I suspect it's coming,
sure, sure.
which means theoretically there's going to be a 50 to 75% off sale in Nvidia. But is it going to be from these levels or is it going to be from something considerably higher? I don't have the answer to that. I just suspect that maybe it's coming.
Have you read Beth Kindig's newsletter by any chance on NVIDIA? Her
No,
analysis on NVIDIA.
please enlighten me. I'm not, or at least give
Um,
me the gist of it.
Yeah, well, we can talk about it the next time you come on. I'll send it to you. Her latest
Okay.
one was she's been calling for a $10 trillion market cap for a long time for Nvidia,
Which is
and
double from here, right?
is a
It
double
would
from here.
top
Yeah,
price at 400, I think, or something like that.
yeah, but late. I would say we're in April now. Trying to see if I can find. So anyway,
Did she give
she has upped it to 20 trillion, but she's
wow?
not.
And did she
Yeah,
give a
she's
justification or why?
Yeah, she breaks it down. She does good analysis. I mean, a lot of things have to obviously go correctly,
Yeah,
but
I got to read that.
yeah, no,
I
she's
want to
really
see it.
good. Yeah, I've been following her for almost a decade now. I do like have respect for her. It's not like a Kathy Woods type of analysis where it's like she's kind of. I feel like Kathy Woods kind of just will say
She's
something.
always uber bullish,
Yeah,
and she's
like Beth
always.
is not. Beth, I feel like Beth is more credible. No offense to Kathy Woods, that's not her
I
thing. She's
like
selling
Kathy Wood, but
ETFs.
sometimes it feels almost like she's selling her book. I don't want to say that in the wrong way, but surely she has a stake in a lot of the things she sells, so her estimates they always seem to be on the bullish side. Doesn't mean they're wrong. She's right about a lot,
Yep,
um,
yep.
but everything she says always seems to err on the bullish side. It's none of it's sandbagged.
So the latest post was from March 26th, and actually she just did a post on ARM Holdings, but her last post was March 26th. Not the first time she's calling for a path to a $20 trillion market cap. It's just a reiteration of what she's seeing again after months later after she called 20 trillion. So, yeah, I
So
mean,
that's
it's
a
good.
that's a
It's good.
4x from here.
Hmm.
Wow, I'd love to see how she justifies that. It must be that they're taking over some other markets. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. I
Sovereign
where
wealth
the
funds, Saudi Arabia. When all
maybe
else fails.
maybe maybe.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, I'll send it to you. I'll keep this tab open and I'll send it to you. But no, I mean, I definitely think you came with the goods again. Did you see anything on what Microsoft was spending in CapEx during the dot-com bubble by any chance, or just Dell?
Their CapEx spending was relatively flat during the late 90s. I did look at it because I picked Dell. I know Lucent was spending a ton, and Microsoft just for the heck of it. But the thing is, Microsoft was software, and that was more hardware growth. They were building out the internet, they were laying cable, they were connecting computers.
Sure.
That was about networking and computers themselves and connecting, not so much the software. The software was a little downstream, and they would eventually get there, but that really wasn't the run up in the late 90s. They benefit from it, sure. They were a behemoth back then, but their capex didn't budge much. It was pretty much the same through all the late 90s. But again, they weren't pouring it into hardware. They were, pouring it into software, and so they didn't have to increase like the other companies. Lucent was another one that their spending went through the roof. There was a couple others, but Dell was the first one that popped into my head, so that's the first one I picked. And I couldn't believe it when I saw that their CapEx 4x'd and Cisco's revenues 4x'd over the same period.
Sure.
And you have the same thing occurring today, and it just makes me wonder what happens when they curtail that spending. And I have a difficult time seeing how they can even continue at these levels without adding debt to their balance sheet. So that's
Yeah.
just me. And I don't own a stake in any of these companies. I didn't have any tech in the late 90s. I don't have any real tech right now. I do have some exposure to Tesla, but
You're
um,
like Warren Buffett.
all the rest of them, yeah. The thing is, I have to see the asymmetry in the bet before I'll put money into it. And I don't see a world where NVIDIA could 5x from here. I don't see a world where, Microsoft and Google are 5xing for it. May take a decade, maybe over a decade it could happen.
You know,
But I do see worlds in which Tesla could 5x or 10x or more.
sure.
So that's why I play Tesla as opposed to the rest.
Sure. Yeah. I spent like a week going back and forth with people and research on how NVIDIA allegedly, Jensen Huang, not allegedly, he said at GTC he believes that he's going to sell between the year 2025 and 2027 a cumulative sales revenue between just Blackwell and Rubin of $1 trillion. So if you do the math and you compare to what Wall Street's estimating that Nvidia is going to do this year, 2026. I mean, Wall Street's way off,
It's still
and
right. It's
Jensen
still at
Huang
least
really
another
has,
double.
yeah, and Jensen Huang really doesn't overshoot and kind of like exaggerate. He's been pretty, reasonable in that way. Like he doesn't, what's it called, over overstate, under deliver. What's that called?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, under promise, over
Under,
delivery.
yeah, he usually is pretty legit with his promises.
The
So if
opposite of
he's,
Elon.
yeah, exactly. So and you try to do the math and look and see if you think I don't even know how they would get to 1 trillion based on just all their total sales between gaming and the Chinese
Yeah, they got a
chips
ways to
and
go.
got a
Yeah,
ways to go. Yeah, but people act like no, that's easy. Like that's
it's
not
in
a
the
big
bag, huh?
deal. Yeah, that's
Man, I
what
wish
Beth
I could wrap
Kindig
my
says.
mind around it, but I'm too
Yeah,
old for that, I guess. By the
sure.
way, I highly recommend if you get a chance. Jensen just did a, podcast with Lex Friedman. He had him on for a couple hours about a week or two ago. Definitely worth a listen if you get a chance. I don't know if
I
you have it.
listened. Yeah, I
Yeah,
listened.
it's good.
Yeah, I listened to all of his podcasts.
It gives you an insight into who the guy is. I really
Yeah.
like it. So
Do you ever look at Palantir? I mean, talk about an expensive, crazy stock. Have
yeah,
you looked at it or?
you know what's funny is that stock was in the 20s, I don't know, year and a half ago or something like that. And I told my wife about it and I thought, this is as connected as a company gets. They're in a niche that's only going to grow. The surveillance state's only going to get bigger. And the stuff that they do, there's a market for it. But at the time, the stock was in the 20s and I'm looking at the revenues and I couldn't make it make sense. So I didn't buy it. My wife, of course, went out and bought a bunch of it. And it's 7x, so I have to listen to her constantly. And I
Well, is she
missed it.
still
What can I
holding?
tell
That's
you?
the question.
And I told her, I said, when it got to 180, I said, look, you got to sell a piece. Just sell some of it, okay? And so she sold like 20% or something like that just to get her original investment back plus, and she still has the rest of it. And the way that they're growing revenues and the way that they, like I said, they're as connected as there is in a niche that's only going to grow. There's some point at which the price on that stock starts to become compelling. And I don't know if we're quite there. I haven't looked at it in a week or two. Last I saw was in the 150s. What is it now?
It's well, Michael Burry put out like another note.
Oh yeah. He was riding them or a negative article. Yeah.
Yeah, which was bullshit. All right, let's look. Palantir stock. Um, I haven't been doing the sharing the screen thing because I like this format better, I feel like, when I have someone on. It's trading at 130, so it's down like 14% since Michael Burry.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I looked about 2 weeks ago. It was like 150. So, but
Yeah.
yeah. So
The
130 starting to become more compelling.
yeah, the low I would say is like 125. That's the February 28th when it hit its lows. So,
Wasn't it at
yeah.
150 a couple weeks ago? Am I
Yep.
missing it?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was actually at 155, 156. Yeah. So, but
Yeah. I
no, I
saw
was
that.
just
I haven't read the article, but I did read what you put out on it.
well, there's no article. It's just him posting something that has nothing to do with Palantir. It has to do with Anthropic increasing the revenues like crazy and eating OpenAI's lunch. Michael Burry posts something that says he thinks this is going to impact Palantir and Anthropic's eating Palantir's lunch. So I did a whole podcast on it this morning saying this literally makes no sense. He has, Michael Burry is really smart when it comes to accounting, right? I mean, he's a
Sure.
genius,
Sure.
but he obviously doesn't understand what I think the business model is for Palantir. But that's okay. That's why I did a podcast, and that's what makes markets, right? So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
um,
I am bullish the stock. I don't own any. Like I said, my wife still has some. But it down here 130, man, I got to really start to think about it. In fact, I'm gonna have to go take a good look at it after
let's just
the.
pause the show so you can buy.
I know, I
Sh
know.
Shyam Sankar is the CTO of Palantir, and I believe he would be the next CEO if Alex Karp were to step down or something were to happen to him. The reason I'm bringing this up is because you brought up Jensen Huang on the Lex Fridman show and how it was interesting. I mean, I would just recommendation to listen to any podcast that Shyam Sankar has done in the last like few months. I guess he's doing his rounds. They're getting him out in the public, and he has a background, and he seems to be the one running the Palantir to government business. That's
Mhm.
kind of so he has a lot of insight on geopolitics.
Sure.
And so anyway, just a recommendation. That's why I brought it up because you brought up in Jensen Wong on Lex Fridman, who I enjoy listening to, but Shyam Sankar, anytime he's on a podcast, I'm like, he's the best. I think he's number one now.
I've not listened to him, but
Yeah,
I'll make it a point. We can discuss it next time.
for sure. So, hey, you want to talk to me about your last any of your last two posts? You talked
Yeah,
about kind of
I
an
think I had
update on
one on
gold.
Bitcoin. I had one on gold. I'm still very bullish both. You pick. Dealer's
So
choice.
let's start with gold. You gave me an update. You gave your readers or newsletter subscribers an update on how you kind of were like, this is not like the time that, did you say it wasn't like '08, or did you say it was like '08? I'm trying to look at a long
Well, what
chart.
I'm trying to determine is, I guess I'll explain it as best I can here like this. Gold is historically a very stable asset, right? It moves at a glacial pace. It's like a barge. It moves slowly. It's not volatile. People own it because it's stable, right? Now, gold experienced in March one of its biggest monthly pullbacks in 50 years. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it was like 20%. Let's just say it was
Sure.
roughly 20%, right? I think that that's happened only a handful of times in gold's history. I think it happened in the mid 70s. I think it happened once in 1980, and it happened again in 2008, right?
Okay.
So when you see big pullbacks like that, the market is trying to tell you something, right? Is this the time to load the wagon and get out? Or is this the start of a bear market and it's going to be nothing but downhill from there? So if we look historically, I think the one in the mid 70s and the one in 2008, they both had what's the word? Big underlying economic problems in society. You look in the mid 70s, inflation was going through the roof, unemployment was going through the roof, the misery index was, skyrocketing. There was gas lines, oil embargoes, all kinds of problems. '08, you had the financial crisis. Companies that you never thought had a chance of going bankrupt were all of a sudden bankrupt. The Lehman Brothers and AIG and a handful of others. Um, so there was big problems. The GFC in '08 and the oil embargoes in the mid '70s. So when gold had a big pullback like it did in those time frames, the big problems pulled gold back up quickly, and gold continued to rocket upwards from there. If you'd have bought gold in the mid 70s after that big pullback, I think you could have got it at 130 bucks an ounce in 75, something like that. By 1980, it was 800. You just 6x'd your money, right? If you'd have
Yep.
bought in '08, I think it pulled back to 600, something like that. And it was, 2000 within a few years. Maybe it took till 2015 or something, whatever. The point is that was a point at which gold made a bottom after the big pullback, and it was all blue sky from there, right?
Hmm.
So, so the difference is if you look at the big pullbacks in 79, or I think it was 80 and 83. Okay, I'm doing this off the top of my head
No,
here,
you're right.
but it
80
was
for
80 and
sure.
83.
And then
Okay.
80. Okay.
Those were two of the worst times ever. If you had bought right after those pullbacks, those were two of the worst times ever to buy gold. And the question is, what makes those different? Well, right? In 1980 and in '83, we were getting our financial house in order. Volcker had taken over the Fed, and he said, "Look, man, I'm going to jack interest rates until they're above the rate of inflation, and we're going to bring investment capital back here to the U.S. because we're doing that." And gold responded positively to that in or gold responded negatively to that because gold does well when there's turmoil.
Sure.
So gold didn't like it in '80. And then when Volcker's reality, when they saw that he was actually doing what they said in 1983, gold even fell further. Because again, no turmoil. We were getting our financial house in order. So gold was not going to perform in that environment. So the question is today more like a world where we're getting our financial house in order and therefore gold's not going to perform? Or is it a world more like 75 in '08 where economically things are just getting worse? And I would make the argument that things are much more like they were in 75 and '08. There's nothing on the horizon that says we're getting our financial house in order. Things are only getting worse. And if things are only getting worse, then gold's only going to continue to perform from here. That's the gist of what I made in that, or just to the argument that I made in that article. I don't, nothing has changed, and I think gold's only going to continue to perform until we get to the point where we get our economic house in order, and I don't even see that on the horizon anywhere. So that's the gist of it.
You wrote gold market update on March 30th, and
Yes.
gold bounced off its 200-day unbelievably the 3 days
Yeah.
later. So you
Right.
literally, what the hell?
I know. I know.
Is the entire gold market subscribed to your newsletter or something?
I yeah, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far. But I do have decades of experience in the gold market, and some of the calls I've made on it are absolutely stellar. You know,
Yeah,
you could go back a few years and I've absolutely nailed some bottoms. But technically speaking, the 200-day moving average, if it we're in a bull market, it should bounce off of there. So people that trade off of momentum and technicals would tell you that's an easy bottom to pick.
hmm.
So no
Unbelievable.
surprise it caught a bounce there. And the question is, where's it going long term from here, like in terms of a year or two or three? And I have a hard time seeing a world where it's not six, eight, 10,000 a couple of years from now. I
Yeah.
just
Yeah, I keep thinking about Kevin Warsh nominated for Fed chair, and he goes in there and he's against, QE and something like that and he doesn't lower interest rates because of some kind of inflation. Yeah, I don't know, but
I have a hard time reconciling all that in my head because Trump wants rates lowered, right?
yeah,
Is he really going to put somebody in there that's not going to lower rates? That part doesn't make sense to me. Now, Warsh has a track record of being extremely hawkish, and but those are words, right?
sure,
And this is a deeds world, and he's going to be the man going forward. So the question is, are his deeds going to match his words, right? Just like with Volcker in 1980, when he came in and said what he was going to do, a lot of the market didn't believe him. They didn't. They said, no way. But he started doing it. And sure enough, there was about a 6 month lag between when he got in there and when people saw that he was actually doing what he said before gold actually cratered.
sure.
So there'll be some time for Warsh to get in there and see if he's the hawk he claims to be or if he's the dove that Trump wants, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And I don't, if I had to bet, I would bet that he's not going to be the hawk that he has said. I would bet because I have a hard time envisioning a world where Trump would give that gig to somebody that's not going to lower rates.
Yeah, as far as I understand, he seems to be dovish on rates, but definitely a hawk in terms of expanding the balance sheet.
Money printing, yes.
Yeah. So, but yeah, you're right. Like I could see him going in there, cutting rates, and then ending up, uh, buying the long end of the yield curve or something because we need
Right.
to, because we don't have any buyers for our treasuries, for
Right.
whatever
Who are the buyers that are left? If they don't get the Clarity Act passed, you're not going to have the circles and the tethers doing it. They might continue to do some, but if
Yeah.
they want to get into that market, they have to buy treasuries. But until clarity passes, that's not going to happen. Foreign countries, the Chinas and all the rest of these places, they're not doing it. They're sellers.
Yeah.
And if there's no buyers left, the Fed is the buyer of last resort. Do they really want to do it at this level of rate or with this type interest rates? It just doesn't seem viable either. They're between a rock and a hard place. It'll be interesting to see how they proceed, but I think gold is telling you the way that it's moving, which way things are going to go. And if you think about who it is that owns gold, it's the most sophisticated investors on the planet. It's sovereign wealth, it's the Rothschilds, it's countries, stuff like that. They would know before you and I. We're just investors trying to, place our dollars accordingly. But those people, they know.
Yeah.
They can see the money flows. They know big picture, what's going to pass, what isn't going to pass, who's going to get in, who's not going to get in, whatever. Um, and that's when you see gold rising the way that it is. I think it's telling you something, and I think it's worth listening to.
Sure. So, real briefly, you took a drive to Las Vegas from your house,
I did.
and
I did. This is
you went with a
yeah,
friend.
right. I've been a poker player for a long time. I like to go up to Vegas a couple of times a year and play in poker tournaments. And I have a good friend of mine. We decided to split expenses, share hotel room, share gas on a drive up. This is back in, I think, late 2021. Um, and he's 20 years younger than me. Good guy, good guy, good poker player. And it's about a 5 hour drive from where we live on the way up. And we started having a discussion about inflation, which was, running rampant at the time. It was going crazy. And me always being a sound money advocate, I was saying, look, man, in an environment like this, you got to own gold, you got to own silver, you got to own assets that nobody can debase because dollars are only going to continue to get printed like crazy, which means the price of everything is going to continue to go up. And so gold and silver are the things to own. And I was telling him this back in late 2021. But like I said, he's from a different generation. And he was saying, no, man, you got to own Bitcoin. And at the time, I was not bullish on Bitcoin. I didn't understand it. I mean, I understood the narratives that were around on Twitter, and you'd read an article here, and it would talk about, you know, well, it's not anonymous, and things are posted where everybody can see it, and it could be seized, and it's used by criminals, and every negative thing in the world, right? And he was saying, no, man, you got to do some research and quit listening to that and find out for yourself. And that's the gist of the discussion we had, both up and back, right? And it was easily 10 hours, 15 hours of discussion over about a week. And when we got back, I said, look, man, you look more into metals, I'll look more into Bitcoin, and we'll talk again soon. And so I did. I went and did some research on what it was, on what Bitcoin was. And I put hours in. I'm not kidding. I read Saifedean's book, amongst other things. I read other things that were out at the time and the white paper, all of it, and tried to wrap my head around exactly what it was. Now, being a sound money advocate, it was easy to see that Bitcoin was programmed to be sound money, right? And theoretically, it should be an improvement on gold because while gold is sound money, it's still debased at 1 to 2% a year, whatever they pull out of the ground, right? So
Hmm.
there's still some debasement, right? But Bitcoin seemed to be an improvement over every area of gold, where gold was very centralized and owned by the same group worldwide. The vast majority of it was controlled by a few entities. Bitcoin wasn't like that. It was very dispersed. It was very decentralized. There's no one entity issuing it, right? Whereas gold is very difficult to authenticate. If I handed you a chain, you wouldn't know if it was gold or fake gold. You'd have to go find an expert that could tell you, is it real? Is it not real? But you know what? Bitcoin, anybody with a computer can sign on, go look at the mempool, and you could see, is this real? Is it not real? You can see for yourself. You don't have to rely on a third party. After a while, it start to hit home that that's the beauty of Bitcoin. You don't have to rely on a third party for anything. You can take custody of it and own it and have it, and nobody can debase it, right? Whereas if you own stocks, you own Google, they can decide to issue more shares tomorrow, right? You own a home in a city, they can decide to build 20 more homes just like it down the block. They can start building condominium, right? I don't care what it is, it can get debased, right? And on top of that, real estate comes with taxes and maintenance, okay? Stocks, if you don't invest stocks for yourself, well, then you're paying somebody else to manage it. They come with management fees, right? So they all have costs associated with it. Bitcoin doesn't have any of that, man. It gets rid of the third parties. It gets rid of the costs. It allows you to take possession of it, and it's an improvement over gold because there's no debasement. And then on top of that, if you want to use it as a form of settlement, right? If 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 Russia's going to send us a bunch of tankers full of oil, they're going to want a bunch of bricks of gold. Well, it's hard to do. It's tedious. It's difficult. It's there's logistics involved and costs with all of that. Bitcoin, you punch in a few numbers, you hit send on your phone, and it's done. It's absolutely done. You know, I'll tell you what's interesting. I don't know if it's true or not. I haven't quite figured it out, but I have heard that Iran, in exchange for allowing ships to pass through Hormuz, they're charging them like, $2 million a ship. They're demanding payments in Bitcoin.
I
I don't
heard
know if
that
that's
too.
true.
Yeah,
I've
I
heard
don't
it.
believe it because I heard it on X.
I don't know either, but I suspect that if it's true, Bitcoin would have just ripped if that was
And it
true.
didn't. Yeah. I mean, it's
And the
doing
fact that
well,
it
but
didn't makes me skeptical, but I've seen it repeated in more. I've seen it on Zero Hedge. I've seen it on Twitter. I've seen it multiple places.
you
I
also
even saw
have
it
a
on Yahoo.
trucking, yeah, you also have another trucking protest down in Mexico instead of Canada this time. So many use cases,
Right.
such a good asset.
You look at the use cases, you look at how it's an improvement over gold, and what I want is somebody to explain the bear case to me. And in all I get from the bears is, well, you know what, governments or banks are never going to allow it. Well, they cannot allow it if they want, but a government or banks not going to allow the network, or I mean, not going to allow the internet. Look what happens to countries that do that. I look at North Korea. I mean, they're virtually living in the Stone Age over there because they don't allow their citizens access to the internet, right? It's just not a viable thing. So they can try and regulate it, maybe, but at the end of the day, it's decentral. They can't copy it. That's another thing too that I hear all the time. Well, they're just going to copy it and make their own, but they can't copy it because the minute they copy it, it becomes centralized. And so by definition, it's not Bitcoin anymore because it's
Sure.
not decentralized. And if government's going to do it, you're going to need permission from them. You're going to need an ID, and you're going to need all kinds of things just to be able to get on there and then transact in it. So it loses all the properties that Bitcoin currently has. So I struggle to see a bear case at all. And when I hear from bears, that's what I get. The fact that government's just going to copy it, or they're not going to allow it, or they're going to regulate it. They tried to regulate it during the Biden administration. They did everything they could. They jailed people that made wallets. They put KYC restrictions on it. They told corporations if you put it on your balance, you're not going to be allowed to put it on your balance sheet. You're going to have to carry dollar for dollar everything you have in Bitcoin on your balance sheet just to be able to carry it. They basically made it illegal for corporations to own it. They did everything they could to regulate it out of existence. What did the network do during those 4 years? It like grew 3x in size,
Yeah,
right? There's no
regulation is
regulating
bullish.
it away. That's not a possibility, right?
Yeah.
So the only thing left that they can try and do is co-opt it, and that's why all of a sudden you're seeing BlackRock come out with their ETF, and I think Morgan Stanley just released one the other day. They were anti-Bitcoin until about a week ago.
Yeah.
They're finally
JP
getting
Morgan, Schwab. Yep.
right. So they're going to try and build honeypots all around Wall Street. Strategy's got one, and BlackRock's got one, and Morgan Stanley's going to have one. But at the end of the day, there's no entity that's going to be able to get 51%, which means the rules ain't changing. Things are going
Yeah.
to stay the same. So,
Yep.
you know, I think when you look at Bitcoin here today at 70 grand or whatever it is, 71, something like that,
72 actually, yeah.
I don't see how it's not a screaming buy at these levels. Could it trade lower? Sure. Sure. Short term it could. But long term, it's you can add zeros over the next few years to that. And I don't see any way that's not going to happen. I just don't. It's too good of an asset. It's programmed to be perfect. It's such an improvement over everything we have now, even as a payment network, as a means of payment. And for personal sovereignty, that's the big thing. You have money down at Chase Bank or something like that. Overnight, they could freeze that. They don't like your politics or something like that. They could take it away from you, just like they did to the truckers in Canada, right?
Yeah.
It's you have a claim on it, right? Or you own stock in XYZ company and it's down at Charles Schwab. You have a claim on it, right? And you'll probably be made whole. But I don't, I get old and I don't want to have to work again. So I don't want to deal in the world of probablys. I want to deal in the world of certainties. And when I have something in my possession, I own it, and that's it. And Bitcoin, gold, silver, they are all perfect assets to take possession of. And they're all headed much higher from here.
Very
So,
well said. And it sounds like your friend didn't orange pill you on the actual 3 hour drive or however long it was. You
no.
did your own research, your own homework, and you understood it. And it sounds like the way that you had an aha moment is when you looked at the advantages and disadvantages of gold as a form of money and Bitcoin right next to it as a form of money. And you saw that there were actually quite a bit of
But
advantages on Bitcoin.
right, when you start listing them, they are all very similar, but in a way, Bitcoin is a little better in every one of them. And the one that stopped me that I struggled with the most was, you know what? I can hold a Cougaran in my hand. You know, Bitcoin is programmed on computers, and I can't actually physically hold that. And then another buddy of mine said, "Yeah, you know what? I'll tell you what, you can hold Bitcoin in your head. That's an
How cool
improvement
is
over
that?
holding it in your hand." You know what I'm saying? And I got to thinking about that, and I'm like, he's right. He's absolutely right. Holding it in your head is better than holding it in your hand. You go try and
Exactly.
cross a border with it in your hand, they're going to say, "What are you doing?" But in
Yeah.
your head, nobody can get at it. It's yours. Until
Yeah.
you give up the passwords and you give up access, it's yours.
Yep.
And I like that level of control. It appeals to me. And if you're bearish Bitcoin or you don't like Bitcoin, I highly, highly recommend doing the work, put in the hours to try and understand the asset. Because once you see it, it's like they say, it's one of those things you can't unsee it.
Sure. Yeah.
It's absolutely perfect in every way.
Yeah.
So
It is. It's
yeah,
quite beautiful. Quite
I know
beautiful.
it is.
You know?
It's very clear. And I'll tell you what's funny is I still see that friend of mine all the time. Um, I ran across him the other day, and his calls on Bitcoin have been remarkably accurate in the past.
Hmm.
And I said, "Man," I said, "where do you see it going?" And he says, "Look, man," he goes, "it could be another 6 months, it could be another year." He goes, "But I don't think Bitcoin will really catch a bid until the fall, till
Hmm.
post-election."
Hmm.
And I said, "Why is that?" And he goes, "Well, it needs to spend some time down here. It needs to shake out some hands. And to be honest with you, he thinks it could even trade further down in the short term, which when I look at the chart, I think the same thing. I do think there could be a pullback to the new lows, which would put the fear of God into some people. And but long term, he's uber bullish, just like you and I,
Sure.
right? So we had the conversation. I thought that was interesting. We get all done, and he says, "Hey, man," he goes, "Do you think it's time to sell gold?" He had turned around and bought some gold after our 2021 conversation. So he saw
Hmm.
the light and bought some of that. And I'll tell you the same thing I told him. I think it's headed a lot higher.
Hmm.
I truly do. So
Yeah. Well, I would have only bought the 200 day. I think we got to what, 4,100 an ounce?
yeah, 42, I think, somewhere down there. It
Yeah.
made, and it was only there
I
very briefly.
I
And
missed
you know
it.
what? When Bitcoin makes its bottom, you're going to see the same thing. It's going to wick down very briefly at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and you're going to wake up and you're going to miss the opportunity to nail the bottom, which is going to keep a lot of us from buying a bottom instead of the bottom.
Sure.
And and off to the races it's going to go. When it finally makes its bottom, it'll be on super high volume, and it'll wick down and bounce right back up, just like gold did, I think. I think you'll see the
Sure.
same, and you'll see the same thing in silver too.
Yeah.
We may
Yeah.
yet
Which
make
you're
a
still bullish silver, correct?
unbelievably. I think it could wick down and touch 55 or 58 again? Yeah, absolutely. Is it going to? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe that wick down to 61 or 62 a week or two ago.
Yeah.
Maybe that was the bottom. I don't know. But we'll see. It's not where's it going to go in the next week or month or 6 weeks. It's where's it going to be 2 or 3 years from now. And I can pretty much guarantee all three of those things are going to be much higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
All
but
those
take it all with a grain of salt.
all those
And
Chinese solar panels, right?
yeah. We're going to need them. We're going to need them.
Where can people find you?
As always, I'm on Substack. You can just search for Bagholder. I post all my articles there. I'll have one coming out very soon on what we talked about with NVDA and
The CapEx
CapEx
spends,
spending. I'll have that out probably Monday or Tuesday at the latest. Sometimes it helps if people can see it all in writing. But anyway, again, on Substack under Bagholder.
sounds good. And the newsletter is My Two Cents, or
Yep. That's the title of the blog. Or I write under the pseudonym Bagholder. Either one will get you there.
amazing. All right, so we're gonna have you back on in about a month, which will be good because we'll be getting all of earnings. We'll be
Earnings season.
Yeah. Yeah, we need you back on for that. And we need to go back into all of the oil energy stocks. We need to talk to you about the XLE stocks. We need to talk to you about the probably some of the junior miners too that come out. So, yeah, we
Yep.
definitely have a lot to talk about.
That'll be a sweet time. Looking
All
forward to
right,
it.
Kevin, thank you so much.
All right, buddy. You take
Okay.
care.
Yep.